ISO Productions presents another instructional video tutorial from ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how. Well, hello there, my fellow FileMaker friends, fans, and developers. This is Matt Petrowski bringing you yet another FileMaker tutorial from FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video, we're taking a look at the topic of designing for mobile with FileMaker, tips and tricks for a more fluid experience when you're going to be deploying using FileMaker Go. So let's head into the solution and see what I'm talking about. All right, so what we have in front of us, obviously, is a copy of my iPad, and it's being shown on my Macintosh screen. Now, the solution that we're going to be taking a look at is this solution called Fitness Tracker right here, which I'm going to load. Now, the first thing that you're going to notice is that this may not look like your default database when you open it within FileMaker Go, or like any other database that you have loaded. That's because this particular file has been modified so that I can take advantage of being able to hide the title bar, which you see up there at the top. That area is black right here in this area. And as well, the bar at the bottom is gone. Now, this is a trick that not too many people know about, but it has been shown at previous DevCons. Basically, what happens is when you create a FileMaker file, there is in FileMaker Advanced the developer tools, and the developer tools allow you to save in kiosk mode, and that's essentially what's been done on this particular file. Now you can see down here at the bottom, I have this little lock icon. Now this is another design trick that I use that basically when there is a situation where I'm going to provide multiple levels of access on a Go solution, one of the differences between a tablet or a mobile solution and a desktop solution is that the way that you interact with data is vastly different. You don't have to put a button on your layout for every single action that can be taken by a user. In particular, when I have an action where a user can presumably go into a higher level of access, what I will often do is use an icon such as this lock icon, which allows me to show the user, okay, there's another level. If you know what you need to in order to get into that area, you can go ahead and tap the lock. Now, if the user originally comes into the database, and I use something like, let's say, for example, the get current account privilege set, or I forget if that's the correct one, but if it's a get account privilege set, whatever it is that determines what the user is logged in as, or at whatever level they're logged in at, I can then decide to say, don't even show the lock at all. So basically, if a user had come into this solution, which right now we're logged in as guest, then basically they would never even see this lock unless I was able to give them further access. But I'm going to tap the lock, and then I'm going to tap the login as guest. Actually, we're already logged in as guest. What I needed to do is type and just put in the standard password here, or a username of admin with no password, and that will lock me in. Now what you're going to see is the toolbar became active there, and that's because this file is now logged in as a full access solution. Now, one of the other things that I've noticed about designing mobile solutions is the way that you interact with data is a lot different than how you interact with data on a desktop solution. And that's because you really don't want to use the keyboard nearly as much as if you're on a mobile as you are going to on a desktop. Now, when FileMaker released FileMaker Go, they did it such that it had feature parity. Everything that you found in FileMaker, you would find in FileMaker Go. That includes the tab order and cycling through a bunch of different fields. And another thing to pay attention to, aside from the fact that FileMaker is going to attempt to default into the tab order, into the first item in that tab order, is that we can't currently intercept taps. And that means that when something is brought forward on the mobile side of things, anything that you tap into the background, if there's a button overlaid on top of that, that will receive it. Let's take, for example, this tap right here. I'm going to tap on the little person icon right there. Now, this is one of our most convenient features within FileMaker Mobile. You want to provide users with options. And the best one that hides options is the drop-down menu, which is exactly what this is. Now, as I scroll this up and down, what you're going to notice is I have this switch user down at the bottom. In previous videos, one of the things that I've done is I've talked about how you can use one central table for all of your different values. And within all of those different values, you can actually use the name of the privilege set in a companion field that will control whether or not, based on the logged in user's current privilege set, whether or not a given menu exists or not. Now, currently, I'm logged into this file as an admin user. So guess what happens to the switch user option when I'm logged in as a guest? Well, switch user does not exist. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking the opportunity to use this as a multi-purpose option for all of the features that the user would want, such as my account, history, and logout. But then I'm also appending onto that the switch user for an admin user. So when I talk about the intercepting these accidental clicks, what I want you to recognize, let me move the mouse off the screen there, is I'm going to tap on the pop-up right to the right of this where it says chest and back. So when I tap, this does not merely dismiss the popover that popped up when I clicked on the person. It actually brought up the popover that is on this area over here where I can select. Now, if I was a user and I was to accidentally tap into this area right here, this is actually a defined button. And when I tap, it goes all the way down to the bottom, you can see, and brings up these other options. Now, that's not what I want to have happen. In a mobile experience, typically what you want to have happen is when this is brought forward, you want to intercept the tap and be able to have that dismiss. Now, in this particular case, the user has to know that where they can tap in order to dismiss that if they didn't want to make a selection. Obviously, making a selection will actually change what is presented. Here I have nothing, so I'll just switch back to the other one. So this is something that hopefully we will get fixed within the future versions of FileMaker, FileMaker Go in particular, so that we'll be able to intercept these accidental taps. The best advice that I have with regards to this is that oftentimes you're going to need to use button overlays. So for example, right now, if I was to go in and enter some information into this, and basically this is a solution that allows you to track how many repetitions and how much weight you used for a exercise program. So these standard push-ups. I tapped on the number right there, and let's say I did 20 push-ups, and it will receive that, and then it'll show that it's got this nice little check off. If I go up to this area, what needs to happen now from this standpoint is I've currently entered data in for this particular setting for the chest and back program. If I tap this, you can see that what I'm getting is I'm getting a dialog prompt. So pretty much any menu that you're going to go into on your mobile solution on FileMaker Go, if it's a drop-down menu, what you're going to want to do is overlay a button on top of that menu that intercepts the tap before you actually decide to go to the menu. Having the menu exposed raw and by itself means that the user is going to access that, and if a tab order is turned on, FileMaker is going to want to, after it receives input for that particular field, it's going to want to go to the next field, and that's not what we want to have happen. We want to control all of the UI with regards to when the user taps. So in this situation, by putting a button over the actual drop-down menu, which is the most convenient selection list to pick from, I can actually do some testing and determine whether or not I should even go into the menu. And here in this case, that's exactly what I'm doing. So here I'll go ahead and say, okay, I want to keep this data. But you'll notice that if I tap the date, which I'm going to tap right here on the actual date, again, I get the same prompt. And that's because this particular process is going to change the date for all of the other items. So let's go ahead and change the date. And it'll take me into the date and time picker. Now here's one of the things that's really sort of unfortunate about FileMaker Go. It extends these fields really wide, and it makes them much bigger than you actually need in order to input, and it's sort of ugly looking. And the best solution that I've come up with is, you can see that in this case, the field is the same height as the whole header, which in this case, I'm using 88. That's just double of what the standard is for FileMaker Go or for iOS development, which is the suggested smallest size for an interactable object is 44 pixels. Of course, you can get away with 33 or something less. But here, let's say I want to switch this to, let's switch it to February, I don't know, let's go to the 23rd or whatever it is. Now the problem here is I'm left with, how do I choose to continue with this? I don't have an accept button right here or anything else. And again, if I was to tap anywhere in this area, all of these are defined as buttons, and tapping here will actually select the portal row. So I'm going to tap right here, and you're going to see that what's going to happen is FileMaker is going to accept it. Unfortunately, in that case, part of my script was a submission that went to another layout and then came back to this same layout. So it didn't receive the tap that I just tapped a second time right there to actually show that the portal row is selected. So some of the other things that I've learned with regards to mobile is that it's a lot of the times when you're working with list-based information, it's much easier to provide buttons as your primary method of interaction for the tablet. Take all of your fields out and then actually just provide those buttons, because the buttons truly give you a way to interact in a much more fluid way. So formerly, what I had in this solution is, this was a drop-down menu, right here was a drop-down menu, and right here was a drop-down menu. Now you can see that in this program, I'm arbitrarily, or not arbitrarily, but I'm specifically showing only those items that are required for that particular line. For example, let's take a look at this exercise called Heavy Pants. It wants to track both your repetitions and your weight. So what I decided to do in this regard is I decided to standardize and put some of my common selection elements, or things that are done on a regular basis, rather than putting them directly on the record. Whether or not it's list view or not, I decided to put them down at the bottom and make them column specific. So we can see on this Heavy Pants, when I tap this icon, when I tap you can see how it got large right there. That's a little graphic effect that I'm using, where the pressed version of a button shows a larger version of an icon than its existing version. So let's say I did 15 repetitions, and this will say that it's completed, and although it's not completed actually until I enter the weight, you can see that I do the same thing with the weight icon, where I bring up how many pounds did I use. Well, let's say I used 25 pounds and I accomplished 15 repetitions. Well, by switching to these buttons, it made it possible for me to make these selections down here at the bottom, and all I have to do is use logic in order to determine whether or not the row that I've selected on actually wants to receive these pieces of input. And once I put the input in, I can obviously clear those as well. So the whole goal with mobile is to control the experience, and the easiest way to do that is to do these few things, which I'm going to show you now in the regular version of the FileMaker database, and show you how to actually control a lot of the things that I've just shown you. All right, so let's take a look at some of those things that I was talking about how easy this is to add these few little tweaks to your solution to make it look that much better when you're working with FileMaker Go. Now here I have the regular FileMaker database. I'm going to go into layout mode. And the easiest thing to do when you're designing for mobile, because you want to intercept and receive all the different taps, is simply do a select all with Command or Control A. Right there is the menu, select all. Actually, you don't need to do the select all. Sorry, I meant to say go to the layouts and set the tab order. Now when that comes up, all you're going to do is you're going to click this item right here, clear all. And you're going to you want to make sure for your mobile interface that you don't want to have anything within the tab order. Unless you're doing a lot of heavy data collection, you don't want FileMaker to have the option to default into a field when a new record is created. Or if you do want that to happen, you want to make sure and put a script trigger on the first field that is in the tab order if you're going to be collecting a lot of data. Of course, that's going to be done on a different screen, because a lot of screens, you're basically just dealing with data interaction. not typically a heavy data collection is going to be done on mobile. Although it is really nice when you attach a remote keyboard. Now, one of the other things that I've noticed is that when you do have the fields turned on, or you have a certain field order and you are collecting information, there are times when you want to, after making a selection, let's say for example from this particular dropdown right here called ID_modules, what you want to have happen is you want to make sure that once that exit happens, that it's not going to go on to the next field within the tab order. In order to do that, you're typically going to use a script trigger which is going to exit with a result of false, meaning I don't want you to do anything after you hit this false condition. So as I drag this off to the side, which that is the button that I have, a transparent button that I have on top, which is set for button change module. So this button basically makes a decision, decides whether or not it should allow the user to actually go to this menu and then make the change. But here on the menu itself, when I double click, you can see that I have this on object modify. So anytime that this particular item is modified, and since we're designing for the mobile experience, you can see that I've got this pop-up save no advance. So if we take a look at that script of the pop-up save no advance, I put it in a folder called shared. You can see that what it does is it commits the records and then it simply exits the script with a false. And what this does is as soon as I've made a change or a modification to that particular field, what happens is FileMaker will then stop all movement. It won't go on within the tab order to advance. Now here's a great little tip with regards to mobile. When a pop-up menu is global and the value is changed, you can use the on-object save. Of course, you can also use the on-object modify as well. So this is a really nice thing to know about globals in particular, especially when you're working on mobile solutions. A global is considered saved as soon as the information is changed to it, whereas a normal field is saved, or it's saved to be committed once you've actually exited that particular field. In this case, because we're working with these pop-up menus or these drop-downs, which I believe it's always confusing what FileMaker calls them. This is a pop-up menu as opposed to a drop-down list. In fact, let me talk about the differences between these. What you want to do is when you make the selection on the mobile, you obviously want to stop. I think I've covered that. But when you're designing a hybrid solution, if you're anticipating that this particular solution is going to be used both in a mobile environment and in a desktop environment, the pop-up menu and heading to that does not actually work on desktop. Let me put my button back here over this object and go back into browse mode, and we'll take a look at what I'm talking about. As I scroll down towards the bottom so I can show my footer here, this is what I'm talking about. These are specified as pop-up menus, or what I was calling drop-down menus. These are pop-up menus, and the equivalent for the desktop, which would work when you use a go-to field, is a drop-down list. I believe that's what FileMaker calls it. Pop-up menu and a drop-down list. There we go. I don't know that those are the actual names for what these widgets are, but you can see that when I click here, FileMaker on the desktop just takes me right to this particular item and does not show my options. Whereas on mobile, if I do the same thing, if I did that over here, if I was to click on the weight, as soon as I hit this field, that little popover, that's what those are called, shows up and allows me to scroll through all of my options. So here's a little trick that you can use in order to bypass or avoid this if you're designing something that's going to be used hybrid. When I go into browse mode, and I'm going to select right here, you can see that what I get right here is a lot different than what I get when I'm over here. So if I'm over here and I tap, I get this nice little widget. So the really cool thing to know about popovers is that popovers, the little arrow actually shows up wherever the popover is. And what I've got going on here is a nice little trick with regards to this icon. When I go into layout mode, what you're going to see is that this particular object is not an actual field and it's not an actual graphic. This is a web viewer. And on mobile, what's really nice, it's both mobile and desktop, is a web viewer will obscure anything that it covers. So if I was to, for example, go out here and marquee all the way until I grab, look at what I grabbed right there. What I grabbed is actually, if we take a look over at our data, is the pop-up menu itself. So if I was sharing this database, because the database that's loaded on my iPad is local to the device right now, it's not this particular shared database, but you'll have to just trust me. If I was to move this pop-up menu into the middle of this web viewer, or where this web viewer is, or all the way over to the leftmost edge, what you're going to find will happen is the little arrow that comes up right here on the mobile version would actually move to right in the area right here, or right in the area there. So the trick here is obscure or hide your pop-ups so that they actually show up where you want them to appear. Another nice little trick that you can do on mobile designs is that as long as anything that is off screen in this area, if it's completely outside of the rightmost edge, then it simply will not be drawn. But if it's even in 1 pixel, it will actually render. So unfortunately, we only have this availability on the right-hand side of our designs, but it is something that we do have. If you want a pop-up to show up, then you probably want to put that pop-up all the way over off to the edge and just leave 1 pixel hanging in. When you use a go-to field, what will happen is the popover will actually show up with the little arrow, this little part right there, hanging, and all of your results populating over here. Now, it really only works for items that are over on the right-hand side. If you have something over on the left-hand side, it obviously wouldn't make sense for me to say, for example, click this plus, and then have the pop-up show up all the way over here. You sort of get this disassociation between the two items that you're clicking. So typically what I'll do is I will use an object to obscure the object that I'm clicking, and then I'll make that the pop-up itself for the purpose of mobile to be a width of, like, say 1 pixels. Now again, you notice that there's actually another object here underneath. So this object right here, you can see I've named nav.mobile, and if we look at the data, it is the pop-up menu. If I select the other object underneath it, you can see that this object is a drop-down list, and the positioning is basically, and in this case, it's relative to, I don't resize this down. The actual size doesn't matter because a drop-down list is going to show all of your options based on however wide the longest word is in all of those options. So even if this was 10 pixels wide, it would still show all of those options. The trick to know is that on the desktop version, the results or all of the options are going to show at the bottom of the bottommost edge of that particular field. So in this case, if we look at if I also click the web viewer right here with a shift click, you can see that both of them are pretty much aligned. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll bump it up like 1 or 2 pixels. Now what happens is the web viewer itself has been set to be a button. So I went up to the format and then I chose the button setup on the web viewer itself. And the web viewer is set up to be a non-interactive web viewer. In this case, just to show the actual icon of the user. So what this gives me is it gives me this nice little situation where I can make a solution that will work on mobile as well as desktop, and I just have to basically decide. And basically the button logic goes like this. If the app is mobile, then go to the pop-up menu. If the app is desktop, go to the drop-down list, and whatever they choose, it's the same result regardless of what device they're on, it's the same field. Whatever the result of that choice is, then go ahead and take that action. That's what allows you to hide a lot of your options. If you think about on this solution, if I had the buttons, my account, history, logout, etc., all the way across, I'm going to be consuming a lot of space, where hopefully the natural inclination on the iPad will be, if you want to do something, just click on your face. If it's relative to you, maybe it's your account, maybe it's your settings, your preferences, your history, your logout, your whatever. That's ultimately what you want to do, is you want to pare down and trim down your interface and hide all of the options until they're actually needed. So here are a few more parting tips that I can give you about designing a clean mobile interface. If you recall, at the beginning of towards the beginning of the video, I talked about the fact that when you bring up this popover or the pop-up menu, which is one of the most convenient methods for making selections on mobile, what you aren't able to do is you aren't able to intercept taps. So for example, previously, I showed you what happens when you click on this actual area right here. It simply activates the script and then brings up the pop-up menu there. Now we know that there's a button on top of that particular pop-up menu right there. And there are buttons right here as well. The trick to intercept the tap is to simply create a script called, I just call it Intercept Tap. And what this does is it allows you to determine whether or not the user is in an active field using the getActiveField name. It's really pretty straightforward. But watch what happens as I tap the chest and back, or tap the button on top of that pop-up menu. You can see that what happens is we get the nice clean dismiss of that actual popover, and now when I tap it, now I get my subsequent choices. If I was to tap basically on myself again, well, I didn't put it on this particular button, but I can show you how it actually works. Let's take a look at the script in the database. So over here in the database, what you can see is that we have the option. Let me go into layout mode. Actually, I believe I'm logged in as a guest account. Let's log in as admin. There we go. So I can access this, and I need to switch my custom menus back to my developer or my standard FileMaker menus. When I go into layout mode and go into the defined scripts, you're going to see that I have this script right here called Intercept Tap in this version of the database. And Intercept Tap quite simply says, if not is empty, if the getActiveField name is not empty, meaning we have an active field, then what I want you to do is I want you to commit the records, and I want you to just halt the script. Halt all other scripts. Now in your case, you may need something more elegant. If you have a process running where you do need those scripts to run, you're not going to use halt script, you're going to use exit script, or something that will force the quitting or communicate to your other scripts that basically I want to get out. But in most cases, you want to keep this as straightforward and simple as possible. So I tend to just use halt script anytime the user is within the field, and then I put this intercept on any of the areas where the user might be accessing that. So let's take a look at what the button is. View. I'll double click. It is perform script button tap user. So let's go over to button tap user, and it's right there, button tap user, and I don't have the intercept on. So all I have to do is put at the very beginning of this the intercept. So I'll scroll down and I will put intercept tap. So basically the very first thing that the button that is the web viewer for the user's picture is going to get is an intercept tap. And the intercept tap says, if I'm already in a field, then what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to commit and then halt the script. So let's take a look over in the database. I'm going to tap this, I bring up my results, and now I'm going to tap on the actual user face right there, and we get the intercept tap. So that's how we can solve it and make this whole user interface really clean, because now my tap should activate right there. So basically I should tap on something else and then bring up those results. It makes for a much cleaner user experience. So the last thing I'm going to show you for this particular video is how you actually enable the kiosk mode and what the impact is to you, which really there is no impact. Now this solid bar is there because I'm currently logged in as a guest, which I talked about with this particular icon. And in fact, I wanted to mention this icon is not an actual graphic. It's a font that's available within iOS. It doesn't necessarily work on Windows, but if you're designing for mobile, you can optionally show this version, which will scale because it's a vector-based image. It will work good on both Retina and regular resolution on the iOS devices. But what I was going to point out is how you actually set or enable kiosk mode if you've never done that before. It's basically a setting that gets set to the file but allows you to continue to work with the file, and you don't actually have to bind the solution. And it's truly based on what the login account is. If I'm logged in, like I'm logging in right now as an admin user with full access, you then get that toolbar, and then when you actually go to, let's say for example, my account, where you can see my in development process, down here at the bottom I've got this really ugly looking button that says basically toggle. You can see that in a full access mode, even if you set the kiosk mode on the file, that you still have access to all of the native FileMaker controls. It just so happens that when you log in with a lower level of access, or log the file in with a lower level of access, everything disappears. The bar here disappears, and then when you're in the lower level, this goes black, or the menu bar, preventing the user from being able to do things. And there's also other things that you can do within the OS that sort of lock the user into your FileMaker solution. Well, that's all controlled over here within the copy of FileMaker Advanced under the Tools menu. It's basically under the Developer Utilities where you're going to access this. Now, when you add a solution, which in my case, this solution was originally called, it was a file just for myself called P90, which was for P90X, which is the program we've been looking at. But when I add this, down here at the bottom, we have these options of the solution. And so when I click them, one of those options right there, if you've never used Advanced, is Enable Kiosk Mode for Non-Admin Accounts. So by clicking this option right there, I'm basically setting a flag onto the file that I want to make it so that kiosk mode will be in effect for any account that is a non-admin account. And the only admin account is the one that reads full access. That's the only one that FileMaker considers an admin account. Even if you have other accounts that you consider admin, FileMaker only considers the full access account as being an admin account. Everybody else will have that title bar hidden. The cool thing about this is that you can continue to work on your file. In fact, this file, and that is the only option that you have to have. When you go to the Developer Utilities and you add your file, you do not have to create a runtime solution. This does not have to be selected. The only thing you can select is the Enable Kiosk Mode. And if you want, you don't want a user to be able to ever access full admin, which is always a good idea for deployed solutions, you can remove the admin access. So these are the two most popular that you're going to set as flags on a given file, which you then deploy on mobile devices, especially if you're doing a local deployment where there's a file that's local to the device, which is suggested, that actually connects to a hosted FileMaker file or gets information from the internet back and forth using some other method. The cool thing about this is that once it's set onto the file, that file has that setting. So even if you go up to the save as, or save a copy as, when you save a copy of this file that has had the kiosk mode turned on, kiosk mode still stays with the file. In fact, I don't know of a way where you can get it to be taken out of the file. So the trick here is when you develop, make sure and just do your testing on your kiosk file, but go back to your original file and develop, because I don't know that you can get kiosk mode off. Anytime you go into the Developer Utilities on Advanced, you want to assume that the file that you're going to work with is just for testing. You're not going to transfer all of your development to that now modified file, because FileMaker does not necessarily provide us with the ability to take those features off. So if you are interested in what you see on screen, this is what's going to wrap up this particular video. But if what you see on screen, where I've got all of these different images, and I'm basically showing how you can have this image right here basically be whatever resizable image you want. Let me show you what I mean by that. I can go over to this particular layout, and I'll go into layout mode, and then I will just size this out just so you can see what happens. As I size this web viewer out and go back into browse mode, let's take a look at what happened to my mobile solution. Look at that. You can see that it scaled up my avatar equivalently based on how much I scaled up the web viewer. Now obviously you can control the background and all of those other things, but if this is the type of thing that you are interested in, this is another video that's covered over at FileMakerMagazine.com. And these are the types of videos where I give you tips, tricks, information, and code that you can directly put into your own solutions. I hope throughout the course of this video that you've gotten a better understanding of what you can do with FileMaker Mobile, because it's really making a lot of sense to create your solutions in an application like FileMaker as opposed to creating custom code or doing an Objective-C development with a real developer. I shouldn't call them real developers. We're developers as well. But of course, you have your alternatives of HTML and so forth. But FileMaker is a great, fast, rapid prototyping and productivity tool. And since mobile is taking over, these are the types of tips and information that you want to use when you're designing your solution. So as always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own database development. And until next time, happy FileMaking. We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.